Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at Georges Seurat, or Seurat, depending on how you pronounce it. And this artist is, certainly amongst one of the greatest of all time. And in putting together the episode, there's been a whole bunch of things I've learned about him that I did not know. I've been a fan of his work for a long time. It's not like, it's like saying you like, cheese or something. It doesn't take much to like artwork like this, but I've just as an artist, I have a certain and I've used similar types of mark making over the course of my career, and so doing a painting by Seurat or Seurat, and how am I gonna? I'll just say, let's say Seurat. Seurat. I mean, Seurat. Let's call the whole thing off. Anyway, I've used marks like this before over the course of my career. Never quite exactly like this, but it's for me, it's kind of exciting to see if I can do this particular art justice and do it in a timely fashion. This is probably the simplest, least complex painting he ever did, which is why I chose it, because of the possibilities of making this painting in a reasonable amount of time. We'll take a look at some of his other works, and I think you'll agree that they, this would be about the only painting we could do in, a 2.5 hours or so period of time. Okay, so let's, I want to let you know that there's a outline which you can trace onto a canvas, and it's in a Dropbox folder. There's a link below to the Dropbox folder. I'll show you where that is. Now, if you don't have a printer to print it, today's painting is relatively simple, so you could probably draw it out without using the template, but if you want to, it is there and available for you. So you click on the Dropbox link. These are all the paintings that we've already done. I think today is what, folder 98. And in some of these folders, there's 5-6 paintings or more, so there's lots of paintings to keep you busy if you're interested, if you're just watching me for the very first time. So you'll see 3 files in here. Of course, you have the original image, and then 2 versions of the outline. One's a JPEG, one's a PDF. Before I show you how to do that, I want to let you know that there's a private Facebook group just for people like yourself. You can take a photograph of the work you're working on, whether it's the painting that we're working on today or another painting that you're working on totally outside of class. I would love to see it. Our community would love to see it. And once a month, I go through all of those images and I organize them and I give some feedback. And you're certainly welcome to participate in it. It's absolutely free, and many people find it one of the more useful things that we've been doing here over the past almost 2 years now. So, yeah, lots of great stuff on here. Wow, that's cool, Maria. That is awesome. This is the Tanner piece that we did for Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, just the other day. Looks great. Wow, I haven't seen that yet. And there's Waldo here. Deborah posted this photo. This is another one of the Seurat's paintings. We'll come to in a second. In preparation for today's episode, I realized that the Google Doodle today is in honor of the artist because it is his birthday. I think it's the 162nd his 162nd birthday. So that's really I don't know if that's happened yet so far. We're going to get into his biography in a moment, but how about let's get the painting started. I want to show you how to download or how to transfer this image onto a canvas to get started here. So I'm going to play this video and talk over top of it. So you can see that I'm using a 9x12 sized canvas. I print out the image, the outline from the Dropbox on just my regular inkjet printer at home on regular photocopy paper. You can use a laserjet printer, a photocopier at work or at the Staples or any office supply store that has a photocopier printer. And then I'm going to use some carbon paper, and you can see I've used that same piece of carbon paper dozens of times, right? You could probably get about 20 or 30 images out of it. Now you're going to see I'm just really quickly tracing this outside line, and I'm not going to do all the other sides because I'm going to use my ruler once I'm done to do that. So let's just kind of skip through here real quick. Sometimes you need to move that carbon paper around a little bit. And then here I am. I've got my ruler. And so I just want to start with one side, that first line there. And then I'm going to match every line. That way, if your outline isn't exactly right in the middle, you're not sort of tracing the lines so that it ends up being a little bit crooked. Right? You can see it was a little bit crooked there, so now I'm kind of straightening it up. So this is just going to help create a little bit more consistency in the overall finished painting. Okay, I think this is, maybe I'll just let it roll for just a couple seconds here just so you can see, because this is a little bit different than just tracing the outline. Now, of course, you could omit the border, you could make it thicker or thinner if you wanted. There's no right or wrong way to do this. But I do think, I mean, Seurat did paint the border in himself, so it does make sense to me to also do our own border. So, okay, there we go. And once we've got that in place, we are ready to go. So I've got this. You can keep this. You can see there's the back side also, because I'm using double-sided carbon paper. Of course, carbon paper you can get from any art supply store, and there's an Amazon link in the description below as well. Before I launch into the painting, I want to let you know that there's a few things that I'm going to experiment with today to get small brush strokes. Now, I have hundreds of paintbrushes, right here, and here's a cigar box. I like to get these cigar boxes to kind of store art supplies in, because they're nice and light, and they got these little hinges in them. And so here's some of my nicer paintbrushes. And as I said, I used to do very small paintings, or paintings with very small, almost like dot-like brush strokes. And you can see, like, this is the kind of brush that I used to buy all the time. Now, what is this? Daler Rowney, the E60 flat shader. So if you wanted to use these brushes, I'm going to use these a little bit, because that's, if I was doing this on my own without you know, in a little bit more of advanced way, that's the brush I would use. So I might use a little bit of that, but that might make it's certainly not something that, you know, a beginner painter would have in their toolkit, especially if you bought like one of the the pre-packaged brush sets that I recommended at the very, very beginning of our painting course a year and a half ago. So I am going to try using some Q-tips to do this. And I've got a couple of different kinds of Q-tips. There's some that have much more of a pointed, I don't know if that's, let me see if those are visible at all here. On a white background. What is, let's see. Here's a painting we made just the other day. Right, you can see that one has a much sharper point versus a more rounder point. It sort of really depends. Well, I'm going to experiment with both of them just to see if I can find one that I can really recommend. So if you want to use Q-tips for today's painting, or you just want to watch and see how it turns out, that is perfectly acceptable. The one thing that I may also add here, and this is, again, I'm only going to just experiment with this a little bit just because I'm also just very curious, because one of the things, if we're doing a lot of little tiny dots, what can end up happening is we have these little peaks, like it's sort of like decorating a cake, and you're going to have, if we think of like the flat side of a canvas, here, I could have just used the gray here to show you the Q-tips. Anyway, if we were to, what I'm expecting is, let's say you have a paintbrush, right? It's possible that what we end up doing is we end up creating these types of shapes as the little dots on the surface of the canvas. And as experience would tell me that something like this, a self-leveling gel, might help transform these into more like this type of a mark. Because what the self-leveling gel is all about is it helps paint to lose the brush strokes. So some people really, really like having brush strokes, and if you really, really like seeing brush strokes, then you might want to use something like this, a heavy gel, right? That will preserve the thickness and texture of the paint. If you don't like that and you don't want that at all, then this is the exact opposite. Self-leveling gel helps the paint level out. And so some people, yeah, so I think I've never used it for this purpose, but I have lots and lots of gels. So I thought, like, hey, let's break it out and see what results we may get. So anyway, those are a few things that I'm thinking about using in today's episode. Let's get the painting prepped. So as always, the first thing that I like to do is put a little bit of warm yellow onto the surface of the canvas. And I'm going to put some water into this mixture. So I've been doing this for a year and a half. I started doing it as a matter of convenience, and I've kind of fallen in love with the overall results it gives, and now this has become part of my own personal art practice. I'm making a graphic novel, and I've been painting every page. This is just a little sample, but this is, you know, I'm painting on paper, and I prepped all of the pages to look like that, because I figured, like, hey, if this process is good enough for me to teach people how to make the most famous paintings in art history, then I better stand by my technique and apply it in my own artwork. And it's turning out pretty good so far. So I'm certainly, I don't know if there's anyone else who's ever in the history of art done anything like that. Use this color. Certainly doing what we're doing right now, applying paint, a colored ground on the surface of the painting before we've applied any other painting. This has a long tradition in Western art, and artists from since basically the Renaissance period, around the late 1400s, have been doing this. In Italy, where this is thought to have originated, or at least where it was at least popularized, have, you know, since the Renaissance, called this the imprimatura, the first layer of paint. And you could use any color. In fact, just the other day, we used red for our painting, and we've used different kinds of red. And we've used blue. We did a blue one. An Anne Savage painting back in about almost a year ago exactly, where we used a cool blue. So you can use any color. Traditionally, artists would use a kind of a rusty brown red color to get the painting started. So once we've got that, we're going to let this dry. We'll talk a little bit about the biography of today's artist. So paintbrush clean, so the paint's not going to dry in there. Let's jump to back onto the computer here. Okay. So, as I said, Seurat, I've heard before. So again, let's try Seurat. Georges Pierre Seurat. So he was born in Paris in 1859 and dies in 1891 at age 31. I had no idea until I was putting together this episode that he had died so young. Especially when we see the amount of work he created and how long it took him to make each painting. I don't think, as you'll see, you would be surprised to think that this is a person who lived a long life and created a ton of work, right? So here I'm just gonna look. 100. This is just what they have here on the Wiki Art page. 173 artworks. So if we go to the origins of his early work, you know, his father was like a sort of a government bureaucrat who saved up enough money and then started speculating on real estate and hit big, made a lot of money, became very wealthy. There's a kind of a strange relationship with the mother there, where the father and mother live separately in different houses. I don't know. I haven't been able to discover too much information about that. But because of the family's kind of newfound wealth, it enabled Georges Pierre to attend good schools and eventually enroll in l'École des Beaux-Arts, which is the most famous art school in France, post-secondary school, and that's where he studied painting. And l'École des Beaux-Arts, especially at that time, was a very traditional academic approach to painting. And so he learned how to paint and draw and sculpt from the quote-unquote old masters, and usually that means Renaissance Italian masters. So in all of the great old art schools, there are these plaster casts from the original Michelangelo sculptures, all of the great sculptures that, if you've ever been to the Louvre in Paris and you've seen like the Winged Victory, the top of the stairs there, which is like an ancient, I think it's Roman. I think it's Roman or Greek. This big. Anyway, there's all of these sculptures from the Louvre. At one point, they were cast in plaster from the original, and those were disseminated to many of the greatest art schools in the world. So there was maybe like 10 or 12 copies of them. And so that's what he would have been studying from. In terms of sculpture, he would have been sculpting images like of Michelangelo. He would have been drawing Michelangelo, like based on Michelangelo's sculpture. So you'd be, even before drawing from like nude models, you'd be drawing from Michelangelo's David, for instance. And also you'd be painting copies of many of the, like, Leonardo's paintings, which are, there's obviously the Mona Lisa in the Louvre collection. So that's your very academic approach to painting, is sort of doing what we're doing, right? This master study is, you know, not something that I just came up with. This is really how artists have been learning for over, you know, 5-6 centuries. So as well, really, that not only are you looking at the quote-unquote old masters, and of course, when we say that, really, we're talking purely European, right? There's not at all interested in the great artists from China and Japan and so on and so forth. So the other thing is this really privileging of the hidden, unseen Platonic, like Plato, Platonic forms that underlie all of life, right? There's this idea going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle that there is this invisible world that is underneath the, you know, that has been sort of clothed with skin and bones and clothing but everything else can be distilled to these very geometric, rudimentary shapes, right? And that to make a perfect painting, what you do is you throw away all of the other artifice and you get down to this very rigid kind of structure, right? And that becomes very, very important. And that type of training is something that the Impressionists, and that type of painting, right? That was a kind of painting that dominated the art for 400 years. You know, it's very rigid, you know, like painting not from life, but painting from almost like geometry. And the Impressionists, like Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Manet, all of the, you know, Berthe Morisot, one of the great revolutions that they brought about in the 1860s, 1870s was the direct study of life itself. So taking your easel, going outside and painting trees and rivers and people, you know, and so that was the big revolution, right? And so not only, I mean, there's all sorts of things that the Impressionists did to change the world. You know, we think of it mostly in terms of the brushwork and the color, you know, these brightly saturated paintings, but really, that is sort of what we see at first glance. What the Impressionists really did is sort of overturn the whole concept of learning direct, like going back to these fundamental Platonic forms for their study. So again, here we're looking at the paintings that he's doing, I guess sort of right towards, like after art school ends, during, I think this time, it must have been right before the paintings we're seeing here. He spends a year as part of military service, and after he gets back, he starts working on what will become his most famous painting, his first real masterpiece. And we start seeing here, these are studies for the painting. Here again, you can see a lot of his paintings look kind of familiar. It's because he's really, you know, trying to perfect the composition that, look, there's over 60 paintings and drawings he did in preparation. See here, the final study for the bathing at Asnières. Where is the final painting? We can just keep on going. So this is the next one. Are they going to show us? Okay, so here, this is his first major masterpiece. I think this is at the Art Institute of Chicago. Oh, didn't mean to go zoom in that close. And I wonder if it will show us the texture in here. He worked on this painting for 2 full years. Obviously, he wasn't painting every day on the painting. He is doing all those little studies, again, to try to arrange the composition exactly perfectly. Let's just trying to see if we could see a little bit of the texture on here. But anyway, that's his first major painting that he creates. It's like 10 foot by 4 or 5 feet, or maybe 6 feet tall. It's a huge painting, and it's done almost entirely with little dots, right? So you can imagine painting this little painting we're about to paint, which is 9 by 12 inches. Imagine, you know, and that's going to take us maybe 2.5, 3 hours to do. Imagine doing one that is like about, I don't know, 300 times the size. I don't, my math is way off, but you know, this is, you know, you could probably fit, what, 40 or 50 of these canvases inside one larger one. And so then he starts working on La Grande Jatte. I mean, just, or yeah, right here, Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte is his next major painting. And where is this one? Is this at, I can't remember where this painting is at. It might be, is it the Metropolitan or the Musée d'Orsay? So he starts going, he starts becoming increasingly more interested in circus performers, and which is, you know, there was a whole area of Paris, kind of around the Moulin Rouge, where you have, which is kind of near the red light district in France, but it's also where a lot of travelers would come and stay because there was cheap rent. Here's today's painting. And in that area, you have also a lot of carnival performers would stay there. And so in that area, you have, like, again, there's lots of prostitution. You have performers, dancers, musicians, travelers, a lot of artists because the rents are dirt cheap. And it's sort of like when we were talking about Jean-Michel Basquiat just the other day, it's sort of like the Lower East Side of the time, right? And so if you're an artist and you want to go make a painting and you want to make a painting of someone, right, the cheapest model you could afford would probably be, you know, a poor starving artist, a prostitute, or a carnival circus performer, because they're all like, basically, they're all poor and would do anything for an extra little bit of money, and sitting for an hour or two while somebody paints your portrait would be ridiculously easy money for them. We're going to start making the painting in a second here. I just want to move, before I move on, also mention that many of these drawings that he did, which are charcoal or Conte, are also, they're kind of like the forgotten work of this great artist. Obviously, the pointillist work that he did is what he's most famous for. But I also really like these drawings, and for many people, they consider his. There are a small number of people who think of his drawings, his Conte drawings, as being superior to the paintings for which he, again, is most famous for. I also, if you were thinking of doing another painting, I love the circus. The painting, the circus. I like the circus too, but the circus that we're looking at is also a really fun painting, and I think this is at the Musée d'Orsay. I've had the fortune of doing a lot of traveling and going to a lot of different museums, so I sometimes get them mixed up where everything is. Okay, so today, this is the painting. You'll also notice that the actual original is a little bit more narrow. For today's painting, I did stretch it out a little bit. I added a little bit more sky to either side here. So if you're wondering, you can see a little bit of the photoshopping going on here. So I didn't stretch the painting. I just added a little bit more in there, which I tend to do for almost all the paintings because very few of them actually fit this format. Anyway, so we've got our painting. As I do that, it's still a little bit wet. I was gonna smudge and then I could feel the coldness of it, which usually tells me that it's still a little wet. So I'm gonna blow dry this for just... Okay. I was like looking at the chat and there was not a single comment in the chat, and I was like, that sounds weird. And I reloaded the page and there's like 40, okay, just take a quick look. Lolly's got her, the carbon paper delivered, awesome. Oh, cool. Lolly's gonna try using watercolor pencils. That's fun. Oh, cool. Deborah did a pointillist painting of a Renaissance young woman. Okay. Love to see that. I hope you upload that to the Facebook group, Deborah. That would be cool to see that one. Okay, so let's get some paint on the palette. I'm probably going to use all of the colors that I have, all 6 tubes of paint, right? And again, for anyone who's watching me for the first time, all of these paints, I use what is called a split primary palette, meaning I've got 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues, as opposed to 1 of each, because as you will see here, one is labeled warm and one is labeled cool, right? Because every color has a temperature. Some are warmer and some are cooler. And its most sort of simple way of explaining it is that warm colors have more of an orange cast to them, and cool colors have more of a greenish blue quality. And the reason, even if you don't use a palette like this, an awareness of color temperature is really important, because it's one of the main ways that artists can create depth in a painting with pure color, right? Obviously, we can use drawing to create depth by layering shapes on top of one another, using mathematical geometric perspective, using scale. I mean, there's like a dozen different ways of doing that. But when we're talking about painting, one of the most useful ways, the most subtle ways, is with it's very subtle, but it is working in the mind of the viewer, who don't even really realize it's happening. Okay, so we got our colors on here. Now, you can see that this is a complex painting here with lots and lots of dots. So we could just take this painting as it is right now and just start, dot by dot by dot by dot, and we're going to do a lot of that. But in order to speed things up, what I'm going to do is put down some color on here, just to kind of ground, so that maybe if we don't cover up every little bit of this yellow, it's not so problematic. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to think about, like, what is a color in here that would probably work pretty good for that particular purpose. And I think, let's say in the background here, what I would want to put down is, I think almost like a white cool blue. So I'm going to mix that. I'm going to put a cool blue here. I'm going to paint like an orange around the border, which I'll probably also use on the Eiffel Tower itself, or the Tour Eiffel. And then I'll have to think about like some of these colors down here. So let's start. I think this is going to be primarily white, actually. So I'm going to take a good old helping of this white, maybe a bit more, and just a little bit of blue, not too much. And I'm going to use my cool blue because that's going to help this color recede into the background. In fact, I'm going to take more white, maybe even more. And I'm also going to take a little bit of glazing fluid, satin glazing fluid. That's going to make this more transparent. Maybe that's a little bit much. So let's just take the rest of this white and mix that in here. This is just going to allow a little bit of that warm yellow to peek through, but not too much. Because basically we just want to create a color that is going to be a good foundational color underneath everything here. That's beautiful. That's exactly what I want. Right, and if I do happen to paint over a little bit of my lines, I'll still see them, right? If I just, you can see that I can see underneath there. I mean, I could paint the whole thing really quickly. I'm not too concerned about making it perfect, but you know, if you can get a certain level of accuracy, that helps. And certainly you could, you know, just skip the yellow and go right to this. The difference is that you're not going to have that warm glow that I like. I mean, that's why I paint these paintings with this warm yellow. I mean, one of the reasons, one of the dozen or so reasons that I do this. And I don't really care if it's totally perfect either, right? This is gonna, I just don't want to have too many, I just really, the main thing I want to avoid is texture, if as much as possible. That's pretty good. I still got lots left over here, so it's possible that I'll continue to use this color as I paint. So I may even, let's see. Well, yeah. So I think that's pretty good for right now. The one thing, it's possible that I'm just gonna put maybe a little bit more in these areas, because often these little gaps tend not to be quite as, they might be a little bit more transparent because less paint is being applied onto the surface. You'll see that I went a little bit into the tree here, assuming that's what this is a tree off here on the left. You could paint that whole thing in, but I didn't want it to be such a rigid shape, so that I wanted to allow for a little bit of the, in fact, maybe let's get a bit more here. I want a little bit of this tree poking, or the sky poking through the trees just a little bit. Okay. So let's mix a warm orange, and one of the reasons I want a warm orange is on the border is generally, like, if you think of it as like a window that we're looking out into the world, the window is usually, you know, we could grab the windowsill and rest our hands on it, and so we kind of want it to be coming forward. You could potentially use a colder color and then do lots of warm dots on top. I suppose that would be an option. But again, I'm assuming that maybe I won't have completely covered my background. So in order to sort of give myself lots of freedom, I'm going to paint this warmer color in its place. Now that's pretty good. I like that color. I think, though, that this color, as it is right now, would work best for the dots that I'll put down. So I actually want some white in that, just like I did for this color. So let's get a little bit more white. Might have been a lot, so we'll see. Yeah, that's good. We're going to put this in the Eiffel Tower as well. Also, let's put a bit of, oops, gotta open that glazing fluid. Not absolutely necessary, but especially if you're worried about losing your shapes, the pencil lines. So this is maybe added a little bit too much white in here, so it's a little bit more peachy than I would have wanted. That's okay. It's just, if I was to mix it again, I'd probably just put a little bit less white in here, so it's still orange, but not quite as peachy as what I've got. But then, you know, it's entirely possible that as I paint this painting, I'll be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I got the exact right color on there. I'm glad I put all that white in there. It would have looked... Sometimes it's really hard to know, you know, when we're starting the painting off at this stage, because we don't know what the final thing is going to look like. We won't know until it's done, right? And that's why we make paintings. If we knew exactly how it would look before we began, what would be the whole point? What would be the fun of actually making a painting, right? Now, I don't, honestly, I don't know if this is how Seurat actually made these paintings. It's possible that he just started painting directly onto a white canvas. But really, you know, when I look and I see, I think he probably did something like this. It's possible. And it's also, he was quite the innovator and experimenter, so, which is partly what he was doing in all of those different paintings that he's making, his studies, is playing around with different ways. I mean, he was inventing a whole new way of painting and using color, right, that no one had used before. So it's not like he was just gonna figure it out the first time around. It's going to take a little bit of work. So you can see there's a little bit of, I don't know what, some kind of little fluff or something that came off a brush on here. Since this is still all drying, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to restrain myself from picking at it, because once it's dry, it'll just fall right off. If I try to pick at it, it's going to make things worse. It's the hardest thing in the world to do, but okay, what else? I guess I could paint. You know, I guess the other colors, you know, I'm just going to use this same color here. I was going to kind of mix something else, and then as I started looking at it, it's like, you know what? I think we're just I'm overthinking this part of the painting, and we just need to kind of get going here. This is really just to ensure that there's something between the brush strokes, but really it's not going to be super visible. In fact, I'm just going to paint this whole thing. I was going to do a little bit of green down here, but you know, I look in, I could see little bits of this color through in the green. So it's just like, you know what? When it comes to the underpainting of any painting, it's just the underpainting. It's not the... It's just a part of the painting that is... that's holding some of the structure down. So... Okay, I think that's how I'm going to begin. Cool. And it's worth just sort of taking a moment to look at this painting now. Before we go on, because it's going to change radically over the next hour or two. So, it's always fascinating to me just to think, like, sometimes I look at these canvases and when we're done, I'm like, it's really hard to believe that at one point that was just a blank canvas. It was just a white, empty surface, and now there's a picture on it. I know that just sounds ridiculous, but whether it's the ones we're doing as part of these master study episodes or my own artwork, sometimes it's almost hard to believe it was anything other than the artwork that it has become. You know, it's sort of like if you bite into a slice of pizza, you're like, huh, that was just flour and water and milk, which was turned into cheese. Like, I don't know. That's I just think everything's kind of magical, right? If we think of it that way, life is a lot more pleasant. So I'm going to blow dry this so that we can get into the little dots. Okay, so I'm just thinking to myself, the best way to go about doing all these little dots, Should I go right into Q-tips or paint? See, the thing is, doing this with a paintbrush is a little bit tricky because you kind of have to go straight down. Maybe let's do a little bit with just a regular paintbrush that probably most people watching me will have. And I'll just try to use the basic materials without any gels or mediums or additives, just so I can sort of demonstrate how I would do it if I was probably the majority of people. So let's look at the painting and just think about where we should begin. I'll probably do my outside border last. That way I don't have to reach over this drying paint. So, you know, it might make sense to do the Eiffel Tower, but since... I think I'm going to use the paint here. I'm going to do a little bit of sky, and I'm probably going to start a little bit in where the tree is. That way, if I do some, like this might be a good area to warm up in, or down in corners, maybe not right in the middle. That way, if I'm not happy with things, then I can always cover it up with other paint and other colors. So, let's do a little bit of colder blue. So I'm going to take my cold blue, mix it in here. I don't want it to be too extreme, right? Part of this is a very subtle use of color. So I'm just using one of my smaller round brushes, as they're called, right? And a round brush is, you know, is like it's what people think of when they think of an artist's paintbrush, essentially, right? It's just kind of got, you can get kind of a point at the tip. So this may even be a little bit dark. Now we see he's using actually quite a lot of warm blue in here, so we'll get to the warm blues shortly. And that's even pushing it in terms of darkness. That might even be a little bit dark, but for our purpose, that's okay. I'm going to go into this area. Now, the thing is if we kind of aren't quite paying attention, we start getting some of various different sizes, right? Which can be a little bit frustrating. So we might have some small ones. I'm actually, this is turning out pretty good so far. I think I'm just still gonna go a little bit lighter because it's gonna be really, really extreme if I do the whole painting in that much darker. And that's got a lot of white in it anyway, right? But if let's say we start coming out. So the point is to really build out your, we want to continue expanding and filling up the surface here with various different colors. And we're going to start, so this is the kind of where we begin with. Then we're going to do using almost the opposite color. There's not a lot of extreme contrasts in this particular painting, but one of the key concepts of pointillism is the juxtaposition of complementary colors. So complementary colors are colors which are opposite from one another on the color wheel. So like red and blue technically aren't exactly opposite from one another. In fact, so, you know, the opposite of red on the color wheel is technically green, right? Red and blue are almost, but they don't quite cross over the neutral core, which is why when we mix them together, we don't get gray, we get kind of a really dark purple, right? And that's why to make our darkest color, we put a bit of yellow in it, and it pulls this color into the neutral core. So technically green would be the opposite of red, orange would be the opposite of blue, because how do we get our darkest color, right? Essentially, you know, if we mix yellow and blue together, we get a green. That's how we get our, right? So, you know, same sort of thing on the other side here. Yellow and red get us orange. Opposite from that is blue, right? Yellow is purple. The opposite is purple. What else? You know, and then of course just varying degrees of it. So one of the main features of pointillism is these putting opposite colors side by side and creating these intense contrasts which almost vibrate in the viewer's mind, right? It's like when it's what later on in an art movement called optical art, or, you know, optical illusion art. We did a Bridget Riley painting a year and a half ago. She's probably the most famous op art artist. But anyway, the whole idea is, you know, putting these opposite colors together mixes colors in your mind, right? So another thing, so for instance, if we wanted to get purple, rather than just mixing a purple painting with it, we might have some red and blue, you know, the cool red and warm blue side by side, the colors which we would normally mix together to make purple. But just by putting lots of these dots together in the viewer's mind, if they step further back enough, they're going to see a purple there, even though there's technically no purple on the canvas, right? So so another thing you could do is think about like just squinting your eyes to look at the picture, and then that's going to kind of remove the detail and help you see the color that is actually there. So we're going to do a little bit of that in today's painting. Doing that in its full way is actually much more of an advanced process that we're not going to do. Maybe we'll probably have a little bit of that more, I would say, on the Eiffel Tower itself than in the background. So I would say like this particular image by Georges-Pierre Seurat, is you know, uses these colors, or sorry, uses mostly just the technique of these small dots, but maybe less so some of the other aspects of pointillism, such as the high contrasts of colors. If we look at, maybe we'll take a break after a little while here, and we'll just take a look at some other images that I think really feature those particular color contrasts a little bit more forcefully. Like I think the Sunday afternoon on the island of the Grand Jatte, and the Bathers, those larger paintings, he's definitely doing that a lot more. And again, that's why he made all of those studies, is that he was really sort of exploring not just composition, but how color might work. And it's just so remarkable that he did all of that before he died at age 31 of, you know, we don't really know what caused his death. It's pneumonia or some kind of lung infection, perhaps. And what is even more sad is that he had, now we're gonna have to look at he had a son that was born, I think, a year before he died, and then his wife was pregnant with another child when he died, and that child also died of the same thing that he died of, that we don't know, you know, that is some mysterious illness. So that kind of double tragedy. So I'm doing some of these dots on the Eiffel Tower itself. And we'll probably put a little bit of this same orange into the background. Into the sky, I mean. Which is another way of sort of creating what they would have seen as like a very cohesive composition, in that, like, that's a very traditional thought and approach to painting. I remember I had arts teachers talk about that. Is they would say things like, if you use a really bright color in one part of the painting, you've got to put that same color elsewhere to create this balance and harmony. I remember, you know, hearing teachers go on and on about harmony and balance, and all the time. Like, that was... I mean, I don't know. I don't teach those classes at the university I teach at, so I'm not sure what the prevailing methods are these days. It's certainly not... I mean, I guess I would think about that. I do think a little bit about that when I'm painting, about creating balance and harmony, and but I don't know if I certainly don't approach it in the same way as my teachers once did. So just thought I'd show another little view here. You know, I'm trying as much as possible to keep the paintbrush upright, because the more that it's on its side, I end up getting these brush strokes that are more oval shaped, and if I'm more straight up, I tend to get more of a round spot. And really at this stage, I'm also not too concerned with getting perfect little dots, because ideally I am going to fill it up with lots of other dots on either side and next to and overlapping them a little bit. So that's why I'm also leaving gaps and spaces in between here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll do this whole layer of this particular blue first with the paintbrush. And then I think I'll do maybe some of the orange dots in the background, in the sky, I mean, with some Q-tips, just so we can see how those work. I don't have any mediums or anything in here, and I do notice that there's some of these peaks forming on the paint, so I'm also just, as I do that, just trying to go back and eliminate them a little bit, because that can be very distracting later on. Because those things, that's going to catch the light, and it just is going to bring attention to itself. And while that might be, maybe you want that to happen, maybe you really want people to see the texture, I don't really think that was something that interested Georges-Pierre Seurat much. I think he wanted a much I don't know if he wanted it completely flat, But I don't think he wanted it to be super thick, textured kind of surfaces. So, I mean, just doing this here, we can imagine how long it would take to fill up a 10-foot canvas like this. You can see why it would take literally years to do that. And when you think about the guy only lived, I mean, you know, let's see, 1882, 83 is when he's working on the Bathers, and 9 years later he's dead, right? And imagine he was only able to produce a certain amount of work over that period of time, because he's creating, and it takes so long to make these paintings. One can only wonder, like, what he would have done had he lived to be 50 or 80 or 90. And yet, even at that young age, he radically changed the course of art history. Because one of the things that he does is he lays partly the groundwork. Basically, he's sort of seen as as creating some of the very first neo-impressionist paintings, right? Probably the most famous neo-impressionists are Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh, who are not considered impressionists; they're considered neo-impressionists. So they're artists that that are using some aspects of impressionism, such as bright colors, but are certainly, in the case of Van Gogh, much more expressive, which is actually very different than Seurat, right? Because Seurat is probably the least expressive artist, I suppose you could say, of his time. They're much more of this academic, contemplative, methodical arrangements of paint and color. Okay, so here, that's my cool blue. And, you know, I was going to say, you don't want to paint too much of it, and I might say, like, were you serious? Because we're about to paint more, like, this is sort of not really a lot of blue or cool blue. We're about to paint a lot of other colors in here instead, so looks like something happened to the chat. Wonder if it's still working. So how about let's I'm gonna break out the Q-tips here. I don't know if I've ever painted with Q-tips before, so I'm also just curious to see how this will work. And that's one of the reasons why I got out the self-leveling gel. So we'll see. I'm expecting one of the so what I'm doing right here is I'm going to start it with just a very little amount of this, the same color that we put in the, actually I'm going to put a little more white in there before I go on here, because if I put this color right there, that might be a little bit excessively bright. So let's put some white. So let's try. Yeah, the one thing I'll show you, it works, but it's very transparent because it's unlike a paintbrush, which the bristles of the paint hold paint, and as you're painting, the paint sort of gets sucked down through the wonders of physics to the end. When we use the Q-tip, it's not really holding the paint very well. It's basically more like a stamping method than a painting method. So if I was painting with like little children, I think this would work. I mean, I'm just gonna see. I'll do as much as possible with maybe. Let's just see the other more pointed Q-tip, the quote-unquote precision tips. Right? Let's try. I mean, I just think it's gonna be the same thing, just potentially smaller. And just for comparison's sake, let's take a paintbrush with that same color and just show you the difference. See how they're already just a little bit more opaque? Yeah. So it works. I mean, but it's not super effective. It's more... yeah, again, I'd say this would be... You could use it with children, and they could be painting, and maybe it has a lot of fun, I could imagine, only for a certain period of time. After maybe 5 minutes of it, I'm sure they would get bored. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to use it any more than that. Maybe I'll show you. So here's like a brush that I've used. This is actually probably not the best example because this is an older brush and I've worn it away. Let's see if I have a brand new one. Okay, I think this is pretty close to a brand new one. Let me just put them down here. So they're the same brush, but you can see how this one is worn down into so I'm just gonna paint with that for a moment. Let's paint with the newer brush. So why I like these brushes is they're kind of, it's almost like the cross between a Q-tip and, oops, you can't see anything I'm doing. Kind of like the cross between a Q-tip and a paintbrush, right? Because the bristles are so short, I'm less likely to get like an uneven shaped brush stroke. And I can still get little dot shapes like with a Q-tip, but because there's the bristles in there, they hold the paint inside, and then they're releasing it slowly every time I dab with it. And I'm getting a little bit, I'm a little bit impatient, as this is which is going to happen throughout this painting. There's only so long you can do this before you start kind of like, I'm just going to cut a few corners here. Which is one of the remarkable things with someone like, with an artist like this, because imagine not losing your patience for years while you do a painting like this. Like, I'm, 45 minutes in and lost my patience and cutting corners. Like, you'd have to have like some Herculean or like level of zen to do all of these marks in relatively the same shape and size and texture. So I think after this orange, or maybe I could do it, well, I'll stay consistent before. I don't want to start mixing different mediums into colors halfway through. So maybe when I get to the next color, I will I'll add some self-leveling gel into these paints so that we can see how they if that helps reduce the peaks, the texture, in other words. Hate it when they're not actually on camera. Sometimes I hate when I'm like painting for a while and then I look up, I'm like, the past 5 minutes hasn't been on camera. At some point in the distant future, I'll have an earpiece and there'll be a producer saying things, reminding me, hey Michael, can't hear your microphone, turn the microphone back. In fact, I won't even have to do that because I'll be like, I'm going to use the blow dryer, and then there'll be somebody who'll turn the microphone off and turn it back on when I'm done the blow dryer. But until then, I'm a one-man band. And I'm trying to put these dots in between the blue dots. So trying to put these orange dots in between the blue dots. But there's, you start getting going, and sometimes you accidentally cover up a blue dot. That's okay. Right, there's going to be plenty of colors, and worst comes to worst, if you're not happy, you can always paint that color back. So you can see, like, sometimes when I paint that little bit of extra texture, I just go back and kind of like, it's almost like I pick up more paint from them and then spread that around. I'm curious if the chat is still working there, if you're able to type in comments or questions, because YouTube says the chat was disconnected, so. I worry because there have been times, a few times, where the internet cut out, or YouTube did something, and 20 minutes later I realize, and I've just been talking to myself here and the video had stopped, and I start seeing comments on Facebook like, hey Michael, the video ended. I think that happened this past summer when we were doing one of the Van Gogh, I think it was his bedroom. We painted his famous bedroom in Arles, and I ended up, once I realized that had happened, I started a second stream and we continued working on it, but One of those things, right? Okay, so let's zoom back out. Right, so in already there's a bit, like, if I look down here, there's like this vibrating kind of quality, because now we've got a bunch of different colors. Really, we've essentially just got 2 colors on this canvas. I already really like the way that it looks. I think it's already starting to kind of come together. We're a little bit of a ways away from what we see there on the left with the finished painting. But you got to start somewhere, right? Just gonna reload this here because it still says the chat has been disconnected. Oh, okay. I see a bunch of people writing in here. It's working. John says, when I want really tiny dots, I use the tip of a pencil, a mechanical pencil. Eileen says the chat seems to be working. Paula says, your wife upstairs will hear you talking, no worry. Well, she's still working right now. She's, I think, anyway, depending. She might just be finishing up her... she works from home. Didn't used to, but now she does. Actually, maybe I might keep this out. John was talking about taking the cotton off the Q-tip. Or I could just cut. I mean, I think this is essentially the same thing as painting with, because there's really nothing, I mean, there's just now every time I dab, yeah, not sure. Maybe it works for you, John. Because every time I use this, I'd have to dip in, so this is even more like a stamp. Yeah, I don't really like the effect that does. It just sort of, or maybe, do I want to show you? Let's just zoom in, and I'll just so you can just see how the effect. Where's a little bit of blue that we have? Or right, can you see how it kind of looks like a bit of a halo? So it looks almost like a straw, even though this is a solid. Yeah. You could let me know in the chat, John, how you got it to work with just and a pencil would be way too small. A pencil tip, because if I was trying to do a pointillism on a postage stamp, perhaps, but I need a little bit larger dots, or otherwise I'd be here for months trying to get this one painting done. So let's go to another color here. And I think we could continue building up slow contrasts of color and very super subtle, but I think just also in the interests of time, I'm going to go to build up a little bit more extreme differences. Where's my brush? Just gonna clean this off. I think this will also help to sort of move things forward a little bit here. So let's take some of the warm red, and actually I was going to use the self leveling gel here. Haven't used this in months, so the cap is dried a little bit. One of the things I do is I just go around to help break that seal. There we go. So let's take, well, let's see, I'll just pour a bit out here. So it's sort of got a bit of a syrupy kind of texture. And I'm going to mix that into this red here. Not too much, because it will, even though it's mostly transparent, just like any medium, if we start mixing a lot of fluid in there, it's going to make it more transparent, right? It's really not a good brush to be mixing with. So I just want to wipe off the paint. Okay. So this, I think, is exciting because even if I do have like some bigger areas of texture, it's going to kind of slowly kind of return to... Ooh, yeah. Okay, that's what the doctor ordered. So this is my warm red with the self-leveling gel. I love it when you use a product and it does exactly what you want it to do. So anyone who's just joining us, one of the things I'm using the self-leveling gel I mixed into the red paint so that I don't have to reduce the amount of texture that that we get when we do these little dots. And even if I do, so I'm painting in the same way that I painted before, but the paint is just sort of laying much more flat, like it's, I don't have quite the, there is some texture, but I can see it kind of like, the peaks almost disappear like really quickly, right? Remember I did this quick little sketch earlier, right? Without any kind of leveling gel, the peaks will stay like this. Versus when I mix the leveling gel in there, the peak will come and then it'll be sort of absorbed back into the paint. Let's go to the left side of this painting here. I'm going to try painting a little bit thicker. Yeah, wow, that's crazy. I don't know if I can just, how do I, can't really show it, but every time there's a big lump, maybe the way that, let me see, I'll just do, right, so as I paint it, rather than keeping the peak, it just sort of goes into a bump. Wonder if I could. Come on. Trying to see if I can get it to. Oh, I had it for a second there. Let's see if I can. Let's get it bigger. Wow, do you see that? That makes me excited to capture that. You see how it just sucks back onto the surface? That's amazing. Wow. That makes me so happy to see the painting behaving, the paint behaving in a way that I want the paint to behave. Oh, Eileen asks, what do you think Seurat used to help his paint self-level? Well, he would have been painting with oil paint, and because acrylic paint wouldn't exist for another 80 years or so. So as an oil painter, you would probably just use maybe a little bit of what they would have been using, turpentine, probably just to get a thinner paint. Like turpentine, or what we would now use. You could still buy turpentine, but mostly artists use odorless mineral spirits to paint with. And because it's like, it does exactly what turpentine does, but it doesn't, it's very low odor, and so it makes it much easier for artists to paint in their homes or bedrooms without annoying their spouses or roommates, etc. Made a couple big blobs there. That might almost be too much. So I'm right there on the edge. Now some of these are a little bit more transparent than others because maybe I've got a little bit more self-leveling gel in the paint. Oops, I'm not even on camera. What else is new, Michael? The one thing that would make me... I'm wondering about drying time, how long it would take for this color to dry, or the self-leveling gel. Because usually when I'm painting, I'm not on camera and I just take breaks and I'm just done a area and maybe go sleep on it. I'm not usually trying to make everything in a short period of time like this. So I'm gonna be curious to see how quickly they dry. I've personally found most mediums can really extend the drying time, which some people really like. Some people, you know, I often hear from people who say that the fact that acrylics dry so fast is the main reason why they don't like using acrylics, even though you can use slow dry medium, or what is called paint retarder, even though I find that, you know, a little bit of an outdated term. See, I got some paint on my hand there, and I'm stamping it around down here, but I'm not too concerned about that at this stage because I'm going to be covering it with more paint eventually. But if that had happened an hour from now, I'd probably be a little bit irked at myself. The other thing too is just thinking about just filling the canvas up as quickly as possible and not being like, you know, there's times where I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, there's not a red dot in that area, but I'm not gonna like, oh, okay, there's no red, I gotta make sure the red dot is there. Like, seriously, I want to just get as much paint on here because I wouldn't even really consider this to be our underpainting done yet. I would consider, like, maybe not for another hour before I can start refining things and start kind of going, okay, I don't want to put a red dot there, so I'll paint that red dot out. You know, maybe I'm like going, well, there's probably no red dots right in the middle of the sky, but other than that, I just want to continue getting as much paint on here as possible. And only once there's a level of saturation do I then go like, okay, let's start refining things. So let's go up here into the border. It's interesting that the border is not consistent, that the color is sort of changing. Like you can see this area right here, I'm not sure if, let me see, let's move that. There is no red dots right here, but then they reappear, so it's, I wonder what his thinking was behind something like that. Eileen says, as a rock painter, I have struggled a lot with proper paint consistency for dotting. I have to try this self-leveling gel. Interesting. Rock painting, hey? I'd love to see what those look like. And where you paint them, are they like rocks that you paint on and put in your garden, or are they in your studio? Do you paint them and exhibit them as like sculptures? You know, like I mean, I honestly don't know anything about that kind of genre. I see that a lot, like our daughter and I go for long walks every day, and I often see in our neighborhood there's a lot of hand-painted rocks in people's gardens, which I never noticed before, but when your child is always trying to pick them up and eat them, you suddenly become very aware of everything on the ground. So and it's inspired me, like, you know, when our daughter gets older, I want to do a bunch of that because she seems quite fixated on them. So it's like, oh well, if that's something you're interested in, we gotta make some. Okay. Let's see. What should we move on to next? How about like an actual just a orange? So previously we made an orange, but then really diluted it with a lot of white. So let's make an orange that is much more concentrated. We'll get the self-leveling gel in here. One thing that this self-leveling gel kind of allows me to do is be a little bit sloppier and move a little bit faster, because I feel like the paint, because it's going to self-level, that I don't have to worry so much about my peaks. And I should say, like, that's just a personal thing. Like, some people, there might be a bunch of people painting this painting and going like, why is he so down on these peaks? I like the peaks. That's my favorite part of this whole process, doing these little dots. I love those little, like, the little points, you know. And again, sorry, when I say peaks, I mean this type of thing, right? When we're looking at the painting from the side. Some people may just be like, wow, that's my, like, why is... that's so weird. Like, he's got a real thing against peaks. He's a anti-peakite, right? Like, what a horrible person. It's just a personal preference. And again, so I, you know, as I said, there's probably some people that are doing it, and so I don't want to discourage anyone from exploring it and, you know, and seeing those results, and then potentially falling in love with that, with texture. I mean, obviously, I don't have anything against texture. I keep recommending Anna Molka Ahmed to people, that the painting we did of hers, we did 2 paintings of hers a while ago, and I think with palette knives, and they are super textured. We used a bunch of the heavy gel, a extra heavy gel, which keeps all of the texture, right? So if you want texture and you're feeling like, hey, I like these peaks, then if you want to go full peak, then get the heavy gel and go nuts, because that might be just your thing, right? That's why I think the more of these paintings you do, the more you get a chance to explore different artists' styles, and you might find one that really speaks to you. That's my hope anyway, is that after you maybe make 20 or 30 of them and really deliberately try to go out of your comfort zone to find a bunch of different artists, that you kind of stumble on one and go, whoa, I never would have painted this way ever before. Never would have painted pointillism before, and you try it and you think, hey, maybe this is what I should be doing. Because, you know, I think when we first get into painting, there might be an artist or two that we like. We think, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to paint like the Mona Lisa, because that's what I think real art is. And then you start painting the Mona Lisa and you're like, oh, this is so hard. It's not fun. It's not really rewarding. And even when it starts to kind of look like it, I'm not really, I guess I can do it, but is this the way I want to spend my time? And then you start looking around and you see someone who does something completely different. You're like, ugh, I don't like that at all. But you paint it and you're like, hey, actually, I really enjoyed painting that. That's so weird. I thought this was like horrible, awful, ugly painting. Maybe I gotta change my thinking a little bit. I've got to reevaluate my my sense of taste a little bit. I mean, that's in the one of the classes I teach at Emily Carr University, which is the university I teach at here in Vancouver. We talk a lot about like taste and where does it come from, and you know, often our sense of what constitutes good art and bad art, you know, comes from, you know, maybe our parents or friends or stand-up comedians that we saw on late night television when we were 12 years old, or, you know, like magazines, newspapers, often like advertising, you know, when we're not even like fully aware of it. And then as you start progressing as an artist, it's really important to start questioning, like, why do I think that? You know, like the simplest way to think about it is like with food, right? Like, you might say, oh, I don't like broccoli. Oh, I don't like fish. Ugh. And then you just think like, okay, well, sure. I mean, everyone is entitled to their sense of taste, and I'm not saying you have to change and you're a bad person if you don't change. But it's worth sort of thinking a little bit, because for me, I can only talk about my own personal experiences, but, you know, like for instance, I remember as a kid, my parents loved going to seafood restaurants. They loved seafood. We grew up in Calgary, Alberta, about as far away from the ocean as possible, and fresh seafood. So whenever, especially we went on trips to anywhere that had fresh fish, that's all they wanted to eat, is fresh seafood. And as a kid, I just thought seafood was like absolutely revolting. And so we would go to a really nice restaurant, and Paula says, Michael, you changed your color without saying it. Oh, I thought, didn't I mention that I was switching to, did I not say that I was going to orange? I thought I did, but yeah, I did, because I said I was going into, I was using orange this time without any white in it, but anyway, we would go to seafood restaurants, and when I was a kid, I would just order the macaroni and cheese, and my parents are always like, sure, you sure you don't want to try a little bit of salmon or tuna, or like, ugh, ugh. And they were like, oh, okay. Or so you don't want one of the $25 meal on the menu. You want the one that's $6.99 or whatever. Okay, sure, yeah, no, that's totally fine. Right? They were more than happy to indulge my dislike of fish, because fish can be expensive. Well, depending on where you are, I suppose, right? And then especially now that I'm a father, I think of that kind of stuff all the time. I'm like, huh, that's pretty funny. Because now, good bit of sushi or something is like amazing. Or for instance, I have a very specific memory of going to a Greek restaurant and my parents ordering calamari, and I'd never had calamari before, and I was like, ooh, it tastes like the best onion ring you could ever have. And I was so excited, and my parents, and I was like, what is it? And they're like, oh, you have some, and tell us what you think. And I'm like, oh, it's so good. And I was like, what is it? After I've eaten like half of the thing, they're like, it's like baby octopus or whatever. And I was like, and I was so upset and ran to the bathroom and pretended to wanted to throw up for the rest of the night and made this big scene. And mostly because I think I was just upset to have been misled, I guess, because I would never have eaten calamari on its own. Okay, so here, Paula, I'm changing my color again. I'm using some warm yellow and white, a little bit of white, kind of just mixing it into this orange. So I'm just transitioning a little bit from red all the way to orange. Now again, some of these dots are, they're fading a little bit into the background. They're certainly not as instantly visible as the red, right? They're there, but and I gotta put a bit of that self-leveling gel, because I don't think there's much in there, so I can see it's behaving a little bit differently. So I'm just mixing a bit of that gel back in this color, and hopefully that will. It is kind of neat to see how that works. I don't know, it makes me think of like Poltergeist or something, where it's like the thing coming out of the television screen. I don't know if, I think there's a new Poltergeist that may have come out, but I'm thinking of the one from the early 80s with the little girl sitting on the floor and the television that's showing the static and the thing kind of like reaching out of the TV. I kind of feel like it's kind of like painting with the self-leveling gels, like it's like, oh, and then it gets sucked back into the TV. Sort of like the counteracting the demon inside of the paint or something. When you're painting for a long period of time all by yourself, you kind of lose your mind a little bit, and your mind sort of starts thinking about all sorts of weird things. So next up, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the blues and the greens, because I think I've got a lot of this color I'm doing right now. While it is making me happy, I don't think it's really showing up on camera at all, and makes for kind of uninteresting oops. Sorry, it's just there we go. Coming back. It's just color is gonna be a little off for a moment here. Okay, well, I forgot to turn on my fan and the battery for the receiver, so I'll just have to wait for a moment for the camera to cool down. So where can I... Putting in a bunch of these little dots in where people probably won't even notice them anyway, at least not on camera. And I'm going to put a more self-leveling gel in here because Lolly asks, did these Impressionist painters invent pointillism, or was it always a thing? Was one particular artist or movement responsible for developing that technique? Seurat would not have considered himself an Impressionist. He would have considered... I don't even know if he would have... If post-Impressionist... I don't think he would have considered himself an Impressionist or even a post-Impressionist. I think maybe probably that term was coined after he died, but I don't think he really saw himself as an Impressionist, and the Impressionists didn't really use this technique at all. I mean, are there examples of people that used dots in their art? Certainly, right? Aboriginal art from Australia, for instance, uses the dot, is a significant part of the style in the. So, sorry, I'm just gonna. Let me back that up. But I don't. I doubt that artists like Seurat or his friend Paul Signac, who adopted Seurat's style, or Seurat, his style, towards right before Seurat died. I don't think they were at all aware of using like the original, like Aboriginal use of these dots. I mean, it could be somebody could write a PhD about it, and I'm sure it could be some fascinating research. Maybe there is some examples of, there were these world fairs that happened, during the 1800s, where they would do things like literally bring Aboriginal people from around the world and display them like trophies in these like human zoos. That's a whole other thing, and that did happen. I don't know if it had happened by this point in time. Maybe I thought that was a little bit later, towards the early 1900s. I mean, yeah, as I said, I could be. I think there could be some real interesting research done in that area. But as far as like Western art is concerned, the first people to use this technique and the first real person to use this technique was this artist, Georges Seurat. Yeah, so that's not really showing up on camera. I like how it looks, and I've been painting it kind of thick, so even though there is the self-leveling gel, I think I'm still going to see little tiny bubble kind of like texture, which doesn't bother me so much. One thing is, my daughter loves touching these paintings. It's like, it is one of my favorite things in my life at the moment, is at night when I read bedtime stories to our daughter every night, and I usually put the night's painting next to the lamp while we're sitting there reading, and every night she like reaches, she wants to touch the paintings, which is just like my favorite thing. And so she likes touching them, and so if there's lots of texture, all these little bumps would just blow her mind. So, after having said I don't want peaks, now that I'm thinking about my daughter, I'm thinking, well, maybe that could look really cool. The only thing is it's just, that's a thing that I've never really liked, really textured paintings. I think often just because of the way the light hits it, then you get these weird shadows on the surfaces. Because the thing is, if you have shadows and light are happening on the painting, they can really radically change the quality of the painting, right? Because then those shadows, become kind of like lines or other colors that you may not have intended. And there are times where, because I've got a lot of light in the studio here from all different sides, and so sometimes I don't see that until afterwards, when it's sitting on the mantle, and then where the light is maybe more just coming straight down, and I'm like, whoa, that looks very different than it did in my studio. So that's why it's a good idea sometimes, is literally and you see this with artists all the time, is they'll just maybe put their painting, you can either just hold it away from you, or when I used to have this big studio, and I would just line the paintings up and then just sit in a chair and roll backwards and then just look at them, because often, if you're painting, you're always like this, right, your nose is just hovering over the surface. Sometimes you can have quite the shock when you stand back and look at it from a little further away. Yeah, I don't know if my mom's watching there. Will comment on that. It's also one of those things, you know, as anyone who, being a child, and you remember little things that are significant to you that your parents probably have no recollection of ever happening. You're like, really? That happened? You're like, oh yeah, that happened. And I'm sure there's, you know, as our daughter gets older, there will be things that are very memorable to her that I'll swear never happened, but be like, really? I don't think we ever went there or whatever. Are you sure that wasn't a television show you were watching or something? I have a story about that in a second here too. So I'm just making a few different versions of this purple. Maybe I'll take one with some white in it as well. Okay, so I've made this purple using my cool red and my warm blue. That's going to give me my most intense bright purple. And I've also mixed in some self-leveling gel here. So the story I was gonna mention is that I remember as a kid, and first of all, actually I'll say, is there actually any purple in this painting? You know, I don't know if there actually is, because really what might appear to be purple is just red and blue side by side, right? So we, like down here, we have reds and blues side by side. But I did just mix purple just to kind of speed up this process, because I'm not going to have time to really, you know, we're already 2 hours in and I'd like to wrap up in about another hour at the latest. So I'm not going to be able to do the full-on pointillist technique with strong juxtapositions of color. Although I could just start painting blue right now, but for the interest of kind of speeding things up, I am going to actually paint purple into the painting here. But anyway, I have this memory of seeing of like a airplane in the desert and climbing on this old airplane in the middle of nowhere. And I remember when I was in college, I was talking to a friend and I was like, oh, I just have this, like, one of the reasons I want to build an airplane is because when I was a kid, I remember seeing this airplane in the desert, and it was so blew my mind, and I was crawling all over it. And they were like, that's a scene from The Little Prince. You know, the book and the animated film. And I was like, really? And yeah, it's like an important part of. And I'm like, oh, maybe that didn't happen at all, and I'm just, I've conflated a memory from a television show or movie into my own memory. I think that happens to us a lot, right? So sometimes we have these like deja vu experiences, and it's not until later, sometimes we're watching an old movie and I'm like, oh, that thing that I thought that's just a that's just a scene from a movie. So, you know, right now I can already imagine the voice in my head saying, "Oh, there's going to be people saying, why did you? There's no purple in this painting. Why are you painting purple? You should just let the blue and the red do this color together." And I go, yeah, totally. That would be great. But I'm trying to get on my horse here and trying to do a painting which could have taken him like weeks to do, trying to get it done in the next hour or so. This is like what's causing this great master to roll in his grave a little bit. It's like, you're spreading false you're screwing up my whole system, the system that was my life's work, by painting purple instead of just using the blue and red. You charlatan, you. I mean, you can see how it starts to kind of pull things together, right? Whereas all of a sudden it's not even quite a contrasting color, it's more analogous to what's already there, but it already starts, there's a kind of a pop in terms of depth in the painting that starts to be created here. So even in where there's going to be this green down here, I want to get that little bit of purple in there too. That self-leveling gel is really helping me just zoom around with a little bit more confidence that I'm going to get kind of the marks that I want without the texture that I don't like. Okay, so how about let's actually just jump right into this warm blue. So let's just take the warm blue. I'm gonna mix this in. Now this is my self-leveling gel in here. Now, the blue just on its own is going to be kind of intense, so it's going to appear kind of dark. So we might want to just be careful about going too nuts with it, right? That to not overdo it, because that would be, it'd be very easy to overdo. Okay, so I got my fingertip in there. Now I could just paint that out, but if I can get at it relatively quickly, I can just wipe it away, right? Which saves me time. Okay. Let's see. Interesting. Deborah says, Michael, this is so interesting. Seurat has always been one of my favorite artists. We studied him in my psyche class regarding how the eye puts dots together to see the images in the shadows. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things is that he was reading, well, we're not exactly sure. Again, because he died unexpectedly at a fairly young age, so it's not like he lived a long life and was able to sort of do lots of interviews and explain sort of his thinking. A lot of what we know about pointillism today is what his kind of collaborator Paul Signac later sort of told people, because Paul Signac was another pointillist artist. He was they met in art school together, and they Seurat developed this technique, but Signac was like, he knew a good thing when he saw it, and immediately started playing around with this style and seeing if he could get similar kind of results. And but there's lots of people who've written books and put forward theses about the different texts that Seurat could have been reading about, because we know that there was like certain articles and things that that were found in his studio after he died of various different color theorists, because color theory was 100 years ago, well 150 years ago, you just, with photography, the invention of photography, you just have so many artists who are just really like the shackles have come off. No longer do they have to paint the same things they've been painting for 20 centuries, since the dawn of the caveman and woman, right? Like, all of a sudden they don't have to make paintings of the king and queen and religious figures. You can make whatever you want to make. And artists start really exploring abstraction. And as you start exploring abstraction and you're thinking all about like color, you start thinking like, well, what is color? How does the eye work? You know, like, and you start just falling down this rabbit hole. You know, now it's like falling down a Wikipedia rabbit hole or YouTube hole, or you find yourself at 2 in the morning researching stuff you never even heard of a couple days before. And so we know that he was doing a little bit of research on some of the latest discoveries or theories about color. And there's still people who argue about color, and there's new color wheels that people put forward. There's discussions about new colors. I was just reading something the other day about, because I've seen a number of articles talking about how women can see more nuance in terms of color than men, and the possibility that women might be able to perceive additional colors that men can't see. So not only might they be able to see more subtlety, but may actually be able to see different wavelengths. And so, you know, then you get in discussion of like, well, is there potentially, could we have a male and female color wheel? That's something I'm just thinking about right now. That's not something I've read, but that's where my mind goes, is like, oh, well, if men are more limited in terms of our ability to perceive colors in the spectrum, then wouldn't it make sense for them to use a more limited palette? Because it would be pretty hard, like, if you can't perceive these little subtleties, then painting with them, you know, it's sort of like cooking with a food you can't taste. Or I remember my wife and I love watching those like cooking competition shows, and you know, sometimes they'll have a vegetarian who's got to cook steaks or something, and they can't taste the food, so they have to like hope that whatever they're making is, you know, is palatable for the judges, right? It's those are some of the more bizarre episodes for sure, but again, you just imagine like this guy who's dies at age 31, who really puts forward a whole new way of painting, a technique of painting. I mean, there were people who were. It's not like he was operating in a vacuum. There were other artists that were exploring color in very serious, methodical ways, but maybe not quite in the same rigor as he was doing in his own paintings. So I'm just going to take this blue, since I've got this kind of white here that I'd mixed up earlier, I'm going to mix so this is the initial color that I painted in the background, as you recall. That's back here. I am just going to put a bit of self-leveling gel in there just to Lolly says, I think the purple in it looks nice. I like it. Paula says, I like the purple in it. It shines. Thank you. I think we're going to be using a bunch of blue here for a bit. Deborah says, I see, or Lolly says to Deborah, I see this is why this is one of your favorite artists. I've seen a few of your paintings, but I'm not familiar with a great deal of his work. But it's really impressive and beautiful. I love this painting. It's really taking shape now with the blue. Is Impressionism within a certain time period only? Well, like with all movements, there's probably some people alive today, artists who are alive today, who would consider themselves impressionists, right? And what I mean, what are you gonna say if somebody calls themselves an impressionist? You could, I mean, there's you can't say no, you're not allowed to be an impressionist. It'd be like saying, I don't know what the analogy would be. It would be like somebody saying, I'm a traditional blues musician. No, blues ended, regal blues ended with the death of so-and-so in 1911, or you have to be from Louisiana to, like, blah, blah, like, because there's people who get really, technical about these types of things. So, sorry, this is my warm blue with some, I mixed it in here. This is my cool blue and white, and I just mixed it in here because I got a bunch of this left over. You can see that it already has a bit of a purpley quality, and that's because warm blue leans towards purple anyway, right? So even when we add a little bit of white to it, it sort of looks vaguely purple because it's moving towards here, right? And that's why it mixes so well with magenta or cool red, and they produce that beautiful purple, right? Obviously, very different result. When we add white to the cool blue, there's no purple in it at all, right? There's no way that you could mistake it for purple. Okay. Oh. I keep doing that because they're already zoomed out. So you could see a lot of little brush strokes in here, but I'm gonna just power through and try to get as much on here as possible. So there is a little bit of glazing fluid in the white that I mixed into this blue. So it's possible that while it looks really bright and intense now, that this color could lose some of its opacity as it dries. One thing, if you're using a paintbrush like this that has barely any bristles on it, you're finding you're having to dip your brush in the paint quite frequently. The one thing I actually don't mind though about its transparency is that I also have to worry less about being, you know, trying to avoid painting directly over top of other colors. Because if it's a little bit transparent, some of those colors will stay there and I'm not obliterating them. And I'm trying to paint a little bit on some of these edges. I think that's also another kind of feature that I see in some of his paintings. Not all of them. Some of them he kind of almost creates like fairly rigid lines. But you could see, like, let's say for instance right here where we have some of the dots from the sky coming over the top. So there's a little bit of a blurring between what is the background, what's the foreground. I love that kind of thing. I think that's really cool. Like it again creates this slightly hazy quality. Lolly says that you should tape a bunch of paintbrushes together so you can do a whole bunch of dots all at once. You could do that. The one thing is then you end up actually having this like pattern that starts to repeat, and you can again try to move the brush around and rotate it to try to avoid that. As far as I know, he did not do that. But again, you know, we've looked at a number of artists whose work is very time intensive. You know, probably, again, the most famous of which is Yayoi Kusama and all of the dots that she does in her work, which I've never heard of anyone talking about them in the same sentence as pointillism, or maybe people have. I just haven't read those articles. But you know, for her, all of the dots that are in her work is a way for her to keep the voices in her head at bay. Right, so she deliberately uses a technique that's going to take a long time to execute because she uses her art as a part of a meditative practice. right? She finds it like it's the only time where she can fully relax, where her mind can kind of go blank and she can just paint. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people who get into making art for that particular reason, because it's sort of just soothing. And so rather than like, and maybe that's one of the reasons why Seurat chose to do pointillism, is he might have had some technical and academic interests in color theory, but maybe he was also just very interested in pursuing something that would allow him to enter a kind of meditative state by just painting dots over and over, hour after hour, and you could find that really relaxing. Yeah, because I mean, there's certain people who look at this and be like, oh my goodness, what a nightmare. You want me to paint that? Like, just dots and dots for hours and hours and hours. That's horrible. And there's certain other people who go like, oh, I love it. You know, it's like people who buy coloring books, right? I would imagine many of them, like grown adults who color, would probably really appreciate painting a painting like this, because, you know, the composition is very easy, very straightforward. Doesn't take a tremendous amount of brain power. You can kind of zone out while you're painting it. You know, you could put a podcast on or listen to the radio, and you don't have to be so intensely focused on what's going on. I could see many people finding that like a major draw for this type of work. So I just added a little bit more blue back into this color as I come down into here. I sort of painted the dots in precisely the wrong place, quote unquote, but Rick says, I've used this on a tube of white and a jar of acrylic varnish for wood. Oh, did I miss some? Practical tip I heard somewhere to help with removing lids and caps of acrylics. Clean off the threads, then apply a thin coat of Vaseline. Threads, not too much, just a little. Yeah, that makes sense. That's probably pretty smart. One thing, sometimes I don't use a jar of paint for literally years. And so I don't mind if the lid gets a little stuck. You also sometimes, like, when you, as soon as you can get, you know, a new jar from the art supply store, and find it hard to open too. It's not necessarily even just jars around your own house that are hard to open. It's sometimes those new peanut butter jars, or adding a bit more white into this paint here, into this blue. Like, you have to just continually just be building up a lot of paint to continue to get to the point where then you can really start shaping things. So whereas he's probably, you know, very, you know, careful about where he's putting these dots, I'm not very careful at all. So this is just my warm blue, ultramarine blue with just a bit of white now, kind of going back in the other direction. Right, so that's the ultramarine blue just on its own. It comes out really dark, especially against the orange. Almost a little bit too dark for my tastes, but I'm going to go back over a bunch of places. I'm not covering up any of those dark blue lines, I'm just adding more to it and you know, I think I'm gonna go around the edges, the border, with this little bit lighter warm blue, and then I'm gonna really focus on like the grass and the greens below. we'll see where we're at. So I'll try to, like, we'll see if how much, because, you know, we could, there's obviously tons of different colors. Like there's more oranges, there's a lot of, I think there's about 3 or 4 different tints of this warm blue in the sky. Okay, so let's mix some, let's get a different brush to do the mixing. Let's take some cool yellow and cool blue, mix that together. Let's just mix a bit of a bigger batch here. We'll start with this little bit darker version. A bit of self-leveling. Gel there. Let's take up all this yellow. Okay. So let's go down to the bottom of the painting here. And I've lost my line work, but I just sort of look at, okay, here's the arch under the Arc de Triomphe, or no, yeah, this is the Eiffel Tower, sorry, not the Arc de Triomphe. But there is a arch under here. I had to actually look at the screen for, what is it in painting again? Oh yeah. And so I just sort of look down and then draw my line down here visually. Same sort of thing. Leave a gap. So this is this cool green. It's pretty intense. We see some up here in the sky, not too much of it. There's also a bit of a darker green. So now down here I'm starting to kind of finally build up the level of intensity that I want. Right, where we've got a bunch of different, there's probably a little bit too much green here, but really this is where I've just got tons of color in here. Ideally I want the rest of the painting to have that same level of kind of thickness of paint, I suppose. Maybe let's take a bit of the cool yellow with just a little bit of green on it. Or a little bit of blue, I mean. And I want to paint this right here, but I don't think that's going to show up very well, so... color's not really in the tower itself, but that's okay. I'm going to take that same color, even though this color's not in this tree. We're going to put make a warm green shortly, but as I said, I'm just kind of in a bit of a race against time at this point here to try to get the painting done in a reasonable period of time. And let's take some white. I'm going to take this white and mix it into the color. Now we're going to start getting an icy green. This is a color we do see in the sky. Oops, no, that's the color we want. I just need a bit of this self-leveling gel in here just to keep these peaks to a minimum. So as I go, I don't need to quite have as many of this color in the background. I mean, I guess there's two ways to think about this type of thing. You could put a very intense, saturated color, but put very few dots of it and spread them around. Or you could use the same color but lower its intensity by adding more white or gray or the opposite color in there, just to kind of, and so but putting a lot of those dots around could end up having a very similar effect on the painting. I mean, that's kind of the wondrous kind of quality of this particular kind of approach to painting. Now, it's interesting as I look at the original here, you can see there's like green on this side and almost really barely, a few little spots down here, but on the left. But it's almost like the sky is divided, bisected by the tower. Just see how that kind of, like, even that might be a little bit too much green there. Okay, let's just take a look at these side by side. So you could see like the density of marks on the left hand side is much more intense than what I've got, right? There's almost, the sky in his paintings got a lot more of that purple effect, but as we saw, there's almost really no purple in the painting at all. I kind of cheated by adding a bit of purple, but really that purple now just is sort of disappeared a little bit back into the painting, and I actually kind of have to now look for it, and I can see it, but especially on top of the orange, it kind of disappears. So maybe it wasn't such a bad idea after all. I see some actual white in here, more orange. To get a bit more of a, so that's just a little bit too white or of orange. I'm going to paint a bit more of this orange in the sky. I mean, it's funny, it's one of those things that sometimes making a painting like this, you might feel like there's times where nothing is happening, or you're just like, I don't know if I've done anything on here for a while, and then all of a sudden things seem to kind of change radically. I'm going to go back to my warm blue. And white. Because really, this painting has a lot of it. And here's really the only place where I see kind of like a brush stroke happening. Let's do just a little bit more. Then I think I'm going to actually blow dry for a minute here because I've got all this paint, and I think a little bit of what's happening too is that paint is starting to kind of, I'm just dabbing some wet paint, mixing it on the canvas. So I'm going to clean this brush off. Oh, wow, there's quite a lot of texture on this one. Okay, I could still blow dry. Basically what it's done is it's dried the surface of the paint, but there are some areas where there's paint underneath the surfaces which is still wet. But let's just keep going here. I want to add the very bright white cool yellow there. So let's take a bit of cool yellow. We don't need much because we're barely going to use any of it. And we got our, in fact, I'm just going to use a different brush to mix this. I'm going to take white. There's a little bit of other color in there, we'll see. So mostly white paint. Took a bit of the medium self-leveling gel in there. Just turn that around. Okay. And then See all of that, how much that helps too, because we've basically just been getting darker and darker each time. Now adding a bit of white into the color kind of really helps restore a bit of balance in here. And I know that some of these dots are done with lots of different colors, this white, but just in the interests of speeding things up. I'm just going to kind of use this yellow white. It's mostly white, obviously, but it's a tint of yellow, but see, all of a sudden this like dimension starts coming into here. I think I need a lot more red in the tower too. And there's also lots of white in the sky, so we've got like, if I was to work on this for, let's say, another 3 or 4 hours, I would put in lots of different warm blues with different whites in there. Coming back in, like I'd probably do a lot more. I would really darken this whole sky quite dramatically, and then start lightening it back up. If I had a lot more time. Let's get back into some of this red. Oh, it's really drying out. It looks like that leveling medium certainly does some interesting things with the paint. It's got like I don't know how to quite describe the effect. So there's a bit of like painting and then painting out and painting back in and painting out and painting back in, which, you know, can seem very frustrating for some people, because you feel like, if I didn't get it right the first time, then I must be doing something wrong, which is not the case at all, right? It's just you want to build up all of this color. And then as we're sort of now getting close to the point where we can kind of refine things and sort of put the dots where we want them, where they're most helpful here. Nice. Let's want more down in here too. A little bit too dark of dots there. This is this warm blue. Putting it back in the Eiffel Tower. So there was more of this earlier on, and we got rid of a bit of it. Or I didn't get rid of it, but it just got covered, right? So as I'm starting to get closer to wrapping up, I start kind of like looking for major things here that I feel are absolutely critical. And different people will see different things in their paintings. Okay, I think there's need for a bit more red in this object, which I believe is a tree on the left side here. Hey, girls. You want to come say hello, kiddo?
I wanted to see Daddy.
Hi. Oh. Look how tall you are. Oh
Say
my
hi
goodness.
to everybody.
Hi. Hi. Hi, everybody.
Daddy's painting.
Yeah. Look at this. What do you think of this one so far? When it dries, it's going to be fun to touch. It's still really wet, all those little dots. See, you got paint on your fingers? Oh, that part's dry. How about when later on tonight we'll take a look? Thank you.
Bye, Daddy. Bye, Daddy. I love you, Daddy.
Okay, thanks for indulging me. Laurie says, is there warm blue in the sky? Yes, I would say the sky is completely saturated with warm blue. There's a ton of warm blue, and even a little bit of like magenta, like white, like tinted with. So that's how we get this very purpley effect, right? Like, I would. Let me see. How are we doing with time? Oof. Like, I almost hesitate to start going in there right now because of how long it could. I could get sucked down into. But yes, there is tons. Like, I mean, there's at least 3 different types of warm blue in here. We have a warm blue that is not, you know, it's not even that much lighter than some of these dots that I have in here, right? So basically what you would do is basically paint some of these darker warm blues almost right out of the tube and fill this whole thing up. And then I'd probably add a little bit of white and do the same thing again. And then I'd probably do it again, but add a little bit of magenta into it and get back to this type of a color. And then you're just more and more. And then really at the end, I would add some white with just a little bit of warm blue and over top. And that would brighten things back up again. So it would be a process, but for sure, there's a lot of warm blue in there. And I'm trying to get a bit of an orange, but I've got a lot of white there. Well, you know what? I think what I'll just do is just take some. I don't know if I've even used warm yellow and white yet in this painting. And that'll get me a kind, probably an orange that I'm looking for, because there's a lot of orange in this painting as well. Just gonna take a bit of this self-leveling medium and mix that. And there's also a lot of this in the sky as well. This warm yellow. It's almost, maybe I've gone a bit overboard with this. You never really know until you do it, and then you kind of step back and look at it for a moment. It's probably way too much in this area. Some warm yellow on the side here too. I'm going to take that and just have almost all white. So it's this kind of back and forth, darkening and lightening. You just keep on moving, and sometimes it gets better, sometimes it changes things, and then you've got to go in and make some adjustments. I think I need to go a bit more of like a slightly orange. The way that he seems to have painted is much more carefully than I am. Or at least the final layer appears much more carefully painted than mine. which is fine, right? I mean, the guy's is considered one of the greatest artists of all time, you know, like, and he would have spent a long time on this painting, so my expectations for myself are not that I'm going to be able to just crank this out and make a better painting than... I've never thought that I would do that with any of these paintings, that I'd be making better work than one of these great artists. But it is fun to learn, right? And to see how other people worked, and ultimately you come away with more skills, and then you can use those skills and that knowledge to create your own paintings. Little bits of red down in here again. Okay, how much more do I want to do, or can I do, should I do? You know, one color I haven't yet used is this warm yellow with warm blue to get a warm green. That's one color we don't see here yet. And that color is definitely up here. There's a bit of that here. There's a lot of it in the sky. Down here in the grass. Just going over some of that yellow that I had there that was a little too much. Kind of the opposite the color going in there, but maybe I'm just going to take this purple, although it's mostly dried. Maybe I should resist the urge to get to start painting in this. then I feel like I've got to start going higher and higher.
Do I want to get a little bit more purple on this side, a little bit more warm blue? This is me doing exactly what I said I shouldn't be doing. I think I'm just going to do a little bit of this and then walk away. I do feel like a little bit more warm red. Okay, maybe I'm just going to put a little bit more of these warm red dots in certain select places. Right, you just get the feeling you could just keep on doing this forever and ever. It just keeps going. Got a bunch of this cold blue that is just going to go in the garbage unless I use it, so is this a bad idea to start painting with it? If I mix it a bit with my warm red and just get a darker color. This color's not really in this painting, but Okay, my eyes starting to get a little crossed too looking at it. After a while it starts to be like, whoa, I'm getting a little dizzy. Okay. I think that's good enough. I mean, obviously, I wish, you know, I could paint on it for probably another 2 hours to get it closer to where I'd be really, really happy. But it's entirely possible that 2 hours from now I might not be any happier with it. It is 21. For some, all of a sudden I was like, huh, is it 2022 yet? You know, we start getting into that end of the year thing, and Sharpie is. I do wish it got more purpley in here with more juxtapositions between red and blue, but yeah, part of me is like, no, let's okay. I mean, it is good. It's just, you know, you get in this like, oh, want it to, but it's one of the, like, I might not feel completely satisfied at the moment, but in a couple of days, when I forget what the original looked like, I'll look at it and be like, oh, that turned out really great. I'm really happy. Why was I was unhappy about that? That's interesting. Right? That I find that happens to me all the time. Whereas there's, especially as I accumulate hundreds of these paintings as part of this master study series, there's some that I'm like, wow, I really like that. And then I think, oh, I remember not being very happy at the end of that episode. Or I journal every night. Sometimes I just flip to an older page and I look like, and I read like, oh, I was, you know, I'm really, it's because I usually journal at the end of the night. And I'll be like, painting didn't turn out very good at all. And then it's sitting there looking at it like, really? Huh. So I think that should just be a good lesson for everybody, is that the way you feel about an artwork now or while you're painting on it, you may feel completely different about it tomorrow morning, next week, next year, 5 years from now. That happens all the time. And that's why it's a good idea not to throw your work out, not to cross it out, not to paint over it unless you absolutely must, because you will feel differently about your older work as time goes forward. Oh, I just gotta close this and reboot this app. Okay, so if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I know many of you do already, but there's always new people joining and watching these episodes. So for all those new people, sometimes I do episodes spontaneously, and if you want to be able to find out about them when they happen, you can join the Facebook group, and I usually post on there when I'm going live. And here on YouTube, if you hit the notification bell when you're on YouTube, it'll pop up and there'll be a little notification saying, oh, Michael's live right now. And you're like, oh, okay, cool, I'll check and see what he's up to.
You can also share these videos, the posts, with your connections on Facebook or Instagram, YouTube. There's also a donation button for PayPal in the description below, or if you want to send a check or e-transfer, you can contact me through my email or through the Facebook group. And like I see Lolly here posted, as well as Paula's a donation through the super chat function. I really appreciate that. Thank you, guys. All of your support is what continues these episodes, you know, a couple days a week or more. So thank you, everyone. I can't even... Oh, on... what is today? Today's Thursday. On Tuesday, we are going to be painting a Stuart Davis painting. I've already done the outline for it. I see it just right down below here. Stuart Davis is another... I mean, they're all some of my favorite artists of all time. Stuart Davis is sort of... Well, we'll talk about that, but I'm so excited. He's really one of my absolute top 10 favorite artists of all time. So we're going to be tackling him. It's going to be a little bit different, but not too different from this, nor from some of the Cubist paintings we've done. But anyway, I should just shut up and go. I'm losing my mind. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and a great weekend, too. We'll see you guys in a few days. Stay warm and dry wherever you are on our beautiful planet, and we'll see you again very, very soon, everybody. Whenever I'm done. Good night. Oh, my goodness.